Everyone. So this week has been about workplace risk. I chose to do a similar case to what we went over in our discussion, and it's about sexual harassment. I chose this case because I feel that sexual harassment is a very common and public form of workplace risk right now, with the Me Too movement and all these different cases that are kind of coming forward. It's definitely something that we see in the news a lot. So this case in particular was interesting to me because it occurs between a lifeguard and the supervisor, but it has a pretty profound impact on the law. So as it was mentioned in class that companies are liable for sexual harassment that occurs between the supervisors and their employees, and that kind of came about through this case. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but I'll get into that a little bit more as the video goes on. But first, I just kind of want to introduce the case, summarize it a little bit, give some of the facts, and then I'll talk about the implications of laws, and then I will kind of close with just talking about why I chose it again and how it applies to my career. All right. So first off, the name of the case is Farragher versus the city of Boca Raton, which is a beach city in Florida. So the case kind of initially started in a trial court, but then moved all the way up to the Supreme Court, which is pretty interesting. So, so it was in the Supreme Court it was initially in the Supreme Court of March of 1998, and then the decision was finally made in June 1998. So Farragher originally sued in 1992, like I mentioned in the trial court, and she sued on behalf of the Civil Rights Act. So more background about the case. So while attending college, Beth Farragher worked summers and part-time as a lifeguard for the city of Boca. She worked there from 1985 to 1990, and throughout this period, she claimed that the supervisors were Bill Terry, David Silverman, and Robert Gordon. And Bill Terry served as the chief of the Marine Safety Division. And he was in charge of all the lifeguards, did all the hiring, all the firing, all the discipline. He was kind of like the main person in charge of the lifeguards. And the lifeguards didn't really have contact with anyone in the city besides him. So he was pretty much the only thing they knew for the livelihood of their job. In addition, as I mentioned, there was David Silverman and Robert Gordon, and those were kind of his supervisors. And they set the schedule up and kind of supervised the daily work and made sure the lifeguards were up to the fitness and safety standards for lifeguards. So the lifeguard department was kind of based out of like a small building that had like a unisex shower, locker room set up, and then one office and like an area, and that's kind of where everything happened. And a little information about the city. So the city had a sexual harassment policy that came out in February of 1986, so a little bit after Beth started working there. But no one really knew about it. It wasn't well published. None of the lifeguards or supervisors even really knew that it existed. It was never really distributed efficiently. So fast forward a little bit to 1992. That's when Farragher brought the lawsuit, and in it she claimed that her and the other females, so of the 40 to 50 lifeguards that were on staff, there were about 4 to 6 of them were females, And so they were all subject to sexually hostile atmosphere at work. Farragher and other female lifeguards claimed the supervisors Terry and Silverman conducted irregular, uninvited, offensive touching and would speak of women in offensive and vulgar ways. So Terry was kind of like the biggest offender of this sexual harassment. He did some pretty nasty stuff. There were just multiple accounts of Terry putting his arms around girls and touching them inappropriately. He also made a lot of crude comments. One example of this was in a job interview that he was conducting with a potential lifeguard who was a female. He said that many of the female lifeguards have sex with their male counterparts, and asked if she would do the same if he hired her, which I thought was pretty ridiculous. And she became a lifeguard with them anyway, which I thought was even more ridiculous. But so Terry also said that he would never promote a woman to be a lifeguard. Specifically to Farragher, he said, "Date me or clean the toilets for a year." So the female victims often went to Gordon. Well, so Silverman, he did similar things. They were a little less grotesque, but he would consistently do the physical contact and things like that as well. But Gordon was kind of like the good guy, and Farragher said that she and the other females would kind of go to him and like talk to him about it, but more of like on a friend basis, not really anticipating him to do anything about it. And at one point, he claimed that the city didn't care about these sexual harassment claims. So kind of like telling the victims to just kind of tough it out, and no one really cared about what was happening. So now kind of more information about the process it went through in court. So as I mentioned, it started in the district court. It was in the Southern District Court of Florida, and they concluded that it was indeed sexual harassment, and it was the duty of the city. The city was liable, and so the city needed to compensate Mrs. Farragher. So the city appealed, and in the 11th Circuit Court, it was reversed, claiming that the supervisors were not acting within their job description, that they were doing something that was not what the city wanted them to do. The city didn't know about it, so the city wasn't liable. And so then it was appealed again to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court determines it is actually the duty of the company, or in this case the city, to ensure that the supervisors are not doing sexual harassment, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier, which is really interesting. So the applicable laws. So this, as I mentioned, has to do with the Civil Rights Act, and this case became a very heated topic because it was ultimately asking who is liable for the sexual harassment cases. Is it the individual conducting the harassment? Was it the supervisors? Or is it the job of the employer to make sure sexual harassment is not occurring within their organization? Is it their job to make sure that their supervisors are not doing these inappropriate things? So the conclusion of the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, concluded that it is the duty of the employer to make sure sexual harassment is not occurring between supervisors and their employees, which is very interesting. It definitely puts the responsibility more on the employers to make sure that their supervisors are conducting themselves in a way that is not going to harm the company, or it just really makes the companies more liable, which is great, I think. So for me, the personal future impacts. So I chose this case because it has to do with recreation setting and sexual harassment, which is a workplace risk. And I plan on working in HR, which I've mentioned in like every post, and so you may have known that. But so I plan on working in HR in the recreation setting. So this is something that's very interesting to me, protecting the rights of the employees. And I feel that similar things could happen in my organization in the future. I, in my past working in recreation settings, I've noticed that it has kind of like a relaxed vibe, and which is great. That's one of the reasons why I want to work in like an outdoor recreation setting, is because of that nice vibe. But also, it can kind of open the door for issues if the employer doesn't have a safe working place environment, if there's not rules involved with sexual harassment, if the supervisors aren't aware, if they're kind of feel like they can do whatever they want, then there becomes issues, and it has potential to make the workplace toxic for people, which is definitely something that I want to avoid. So by studying this case, I've become a little more aware of the importance of having supervisors go through sexual harassment training, and the importance of supervisors and their actions, because it can really damage the company, damage the culture, and damage the lives of people that want to work for this company. So that's kind of my take on the case. Let me know if there's any other questions or anything like that you had about the case. But thanks for your time.